I saw you have a podcast.
Did you see the picture? Did you see his picture or just the name?
I just saw the name. You know, this is one of those driving down
Yeah.
Peach Street. I saw the name and on my podcast. That sounds like something that a college student, someone who's young and tech savvy and hip would be into.
Yeah.
And, you know.
But I've never considered myself hip.
Yeah. Well,
But this is a really good thing. We get to understand what people do,
mm-hmm.
and let's see. You're a geneticist. How do you say it?
Well, I am a teacher, but my degree, my training is in genetics and molecular biology. So you could say a geneticist. I think of myself more like a molecular biologist, but yeah, and I teach over at Lee University. So genetics is one of the classes that I teach most frequently over there. So
Is that sort of your forte? Would you say?
mm-hmm. Yeah. So my graduate degree, I went to Emory University in Atlanta and got my PhD in their genetics and molecular biology program. But I did my graduate work, my research was in the human genetics department at Emory. So, and then I did postdoctoral studies in the genetics department at Yale University before we moved to Cleveland. We were up there for 6 years. So genetics is kind of, that's where I percolated for a dozen years.
Where are you from originally?
I was born in Richmond, Kentucky. I'm from Kentucky, but my dad is a pastor in Kentucky, and so we kind of moved around the state. I grew up mostly in Pike County, Kentucky. So if you've ever gone to eastern Kentucky, you drive about as far east as you can go, and that's where I grew up.
What's next to Kentucky?
We were right on the border of West Virginia. So Williamson, West Virginia, about half a mile from my high school. So it's coal mining country, but real close. So if you look on a map, right where Kentucky and West Virginia and Virginia all meet, that's kind of, we moved there when I was in the 4th grade. I graduated high school there. So
Anybody famous from there?
Hatfields and McCoys. You ever hear?
Was
of
that?
them?
Oh yeah, I have. Yeah. Was that
famous,
where? Is that where they
people
were
around
from?
there. Yeah.
The very town.
Yeah, nearby. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. Loretta Lynn. You ever heard of
Loretta,
her?
yeah.
She is from
She was
right
just
there.
she was just a coal miner's daughter.
Yeah, exactly. So she grew up real close to where my dad pastored a church there, Pinson Fork, Kentucky.
So you're from the same place that Loretta Lynn was from.
Sure.
How far?
Just a couple miles from where she grew up. But again, I always have a hard time pinning down when people ask me where I'm from. I always just say Kentucky.
I noticed that you were a little leery.
Yeah,
Where are you?
I was born in Richmond, which is just south of Lexington. And that's where my parents' home is. So when we get together for holidays and stuff, I go to Richmond. And where I grew up, my parents don't live there anymore, and I don't have any other family. So
When you say grow up, to what age? 4 to
high school. I graduated high school, and then I haven't lived with my folks since I graduated high school. I went to college, and then.
Do we consider where we're from, where we went to grammar school or high school?
For me, yeah, I don't know. I kind of consider where I'm from where my parents are, I think in part because we kind of moved around quite a bit when I was little. So I started, preschool age. I was up around Cincinnati, and then I did kindergarten, 1st grade in Lexington, and then 2nd, 3rd grade in Richmond. I was in a different town every couple of years during that time, and so we really when I say I grew up in Pike County in eastern Kentucky, that's the longest place that we lived. We moved there 4th grade and then all the way through high school. So that was really like my parents kind of they settled down there, and
that's where you got your what do you call your maybe your biases if you have some, or that's where you were.
Probably, yeah. And that's where I spent more time than any other place.
In the learning ages, maybe that's it.
But now, it's a good question. I say I'm from Richmond because that's where my parents live. So, to me, I don't know. I think of where they are as my home base. Like if we get together with family and stuff. But
maybe that's it.
Yeah. But Cleveland is now.
Maybe home is where you go to Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. Did you go to Richmond for Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
Maybe that's it.
We get together with a big family group for Christmas morning or something. Yeah. So.
How far is Richmond from Pike, Kentucky?
3.5 hours. It's a little bit less now. I think they've got. You get into the mountains, but the roads are a little better now than they were when I grew up. But.
That's like living in Cleveland and moving to Nashville. You're still from this area.
Yeah.
So you're from the Richmond, Kentucky. You're from the Virginia, Kentucky area.
Yes. We can just say I'm from Eastern Kentucky. Yeah. And just sort of wave our hand over the map of Eastern Kentucky and say that's where I'm from.
Well, you look just like John Malkovich.
I've been told that one time. Today.
Just one time.
Yes.
Well, you look just like him in his younger days. Of course.
I'll be glad to.
He's a famous writer, I guess, or
I've
actor.
Seen him. Yeah, I've seen him in some of the movies, and when I was a kid, probably around high school age, I remember he would go on Saturday Night Live a lot.
I don't remember that.
Several times, and he's got just a really
very quirky
sort of persona, and so I always got a kick out of his sketches. Just sort of
he came from left field on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I've never been compared to Malkovich though, so I'm mulling over whether this is a compliment, but I'll take it as a compliment. I'll be offering autographs later.
Yeah, from John Malkovich. So, what is genetics? Is that I guess that's from the word gene, right?
It is.
Who discovered the gene?
Well, that's a good question. So, genetics is just the study of heredity, right? Sort of how traits are inherited, what underlies that. So the sort of father of modern genetics, a guy named Gregor Mendel. When I say modern genetics, we're going back over 100 years, but Mendel was a monk, actually, Austrian monk, and he is credited with sort of founding modern genetics, setting up. He had a garden at the monastery, and he had different varieties of peas, and he would set up crosses between different varieties and study how traits were inherited. And he sort of came up with, if you ever took a, elementary, middle school, high school biology class where they talked about genetics, they probably talked about Mendel's work because he recognized, some of the things that we are sort of common traits now, dominant and recessive genes and things like that. Those are ideas that Mendel came up with. So he's the father of modern genetics, but he didn't really have an idea of what a gene was. What he was describing, he just called it a unit of heredity, but there wasn't any concept of what DNA was at that time. So
a gene's not like a molecule. It's nothing you can pick up.
No. So it's DNA is a molecule, right? We have chromosomes. All living things have some sort of genetic material that carries their genes, but the genes are little pieces of it. So I don't know. You think about if you have your construction plans, right? You might have a page for different rooms in a house you're working on, and each one of them could be separated out, and they carry instructions for something unique. A gene is like that. So it's part of the chromosome, but you might have 1,000 different genes on a chromosome, and each one of those will operate
what's a
independently.
chromosome?
Chromosomes are the molecules in living things that carry the genes. So they get copied and passed on from one generation to the next.
Could you lay a chromosome out on the table?
You wouldn't be able to see it.
But if you could see it, you could lay one out. Is it physical?
It is, yeah. So this is, when I say my degree is in molecular biology, this is the way I describe it when people ask, what did you study or what do you teach? Molecular biology is the area of biology where you're talking about all the things that you can't see. Everything that we study in molecular genetics is too small to see, like DNA or RNA, proteins. They make things tick. It's kind of what makes living things work, but it's too small to see. But yeah, they are physical structures. A chromosome or a gene is a little piece of a chromosome. You could lay it out on the table. You'd need a powerful microscope to see it at all.
Let's think of it like the old reel-to-reel tapes, maybe movies.
Uh-huh.
Say this is a film, and so maybe a chromosome is a length of film,
Mm-hmm.
and
You
so
can break that up into
these
segments.
frames
Mm-hmm.
are why I have blue eyes.
Yeah. That's the way to think about it. Yeah, and almost, I don't know if we use that analogy, you might could even say, like, a couple frames that are related to your eye color might be right next to a couple frames that are related to your height, right? And not even necessarily part of the same storyline. They're totally different things that they're doing.
So it doesn't flow like a book.
Exactly. It doesn't have to. So that's what a gene is. I think
A gene is a section of the chromosome.
a section of the chromosome that has some sort of product that it codes for.
So you could say, instead of saying a gene, you could say a section.
Yeah, you could. Although there are some sections that, as far as we know, don't code for anything, and those are not genes. Those are just sort of segments that we don't know what they do. They might not do anything.
Or they may solve this problem that we don't know we
They
have
may.
yet.
Right. There's a lot that's still
Now is
unknown.
that DNA?
Mm-hmm.
I get DNA and chromosomes.
Yeah. So DNA, when we say a gene, that's DNA. Chromosomes are the DNA, and there are other molecules that sort of package it together. So chromosomes are mostly made up of DNA and proteins. You've heard of proteins. And so there are special proteins that sort of help to package the DNA up. I tell my students this in genetics. We have a little section where we talk about how chromosomes get compacted to fit into a cell. So if you were to be able to take one cell out of your skin, for example, and open that up. So the nucleus is the part of the cell where the DNA is. It's really small. On average, human nucleus is maybe like 4 to 6 micrometers. So that's 1/1,000,000th of a meter. All right, really tiny. But the DNA is really thin, but it's really large. The chromosome, if you were to take all the chromosomes from one cell and just stretch them out and line them up end to end, they're about 6 feet tall, about 2 meters long. Now they're really incredibly thin, but there's a lot of information there. And all that has to get compacted down, crunched down into a single nucleus of a cell. Times maybe 1 trillion, all the cells that make up a human person. So lots of information. Every cell has all that information compacted down inside of the nucleus.
If I took a piece of skin off here and a piece of skin off here, would the chromosomes read the same?
They should. There may be slight differences, but they should be, for the most part, the same. Now, we point at our skin, over time, the older we get, we go out, you work in the yard or on construction, you get in the sun, you might pick up a sunburn. That can cause mutations in one place but not in another. So there may be subtle differences. And this is what causes skin cancer.
So you could affect the chromosome.
You can.
You could affect the chromosome, which in effect would affect the gene.
Yeah. If you change the sequence or the structure of the DNA in such a way that it alters a gene. Yeah. So that's what we call a mutation. And so in my graduate work, we studied a disease called Huntington's disease, which is caused by a mutation in one gene, and it's a hereditary.
Where's the
disease.
gene at?
It's on human chromosome 4. So we've got 23 pairs of chromosomes in humans, and this one's on human chromosome 4. And there's one piece of it that has a mutation. So the code of the DNA is altered, and it causes the gene product, which is a protein, to function abnormally. In this case, it builds up in the brain over time, and it can cause neurodegenerative disease, like in the 40s, 50s usually. So that one gene out of 25,000 or so genes, only one mutation, but that can cause a disease. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Who says there's only 23?
That's an estimate. All right,
Yeah.
So this is the thing. So I graduated college in 2001, and I knew I wanted to go to graduate school, and I love biology. But what really got me interested in genetics, I think the timing of it, and you probably remember maybe seeing this in the news and reading about it, but they had just finished a draft sequence of the human genome. Right, so they basically.
That's when they first discovered DNA. Is that right?
Well, they had known what DNA was, and had there have been various breakthroughs in how DNA works and how genes work, but there was somebody came up with this idea. Probably this would have been I don't know, around 1990 or so. They came up with this audacious idea at the time was, what if we knew all of the sequence of every segment of DNA in a human being, the entire rule book for making a human. And so they started this project around 1990, the Human Genome Project, and they went about the goal of sequencing the DNA. When I say sequencing,
mapping.
Yeah, basically. So DNA is just I've never really done computer code, but I've heard it described like that. It's just a series of there are 4 letters in the DNA, 4 chemical bases, and it's just those bases, sort of whatever order they're in. So we abbreviate them just A, T, C, and G. So basically, they went through and read that chemically and made a map of the entire, a little over 3 billion letters that make up the human genome. That took almost a decade and almost $3 billion. This was an international project. But when I graduated college, they had just completed this draft sequence. And so going into the human genetics department in graduate school, there was all this excitement because now we have all this information. Now the next thing is to try to go in and figure out what it says, what's it doing. When they started this out, people thought human genome probably, smaller organisms had already been sequenced. So they knew like a fruit fly genome, for example, and bacterial.
So
genomes.
they think they've been able to list everything?
Yeah. So, but when they did the human genome, they said, well, a fruit fly has about 20,000 genes, roughly. So humans, much more complicated. We must have at least 100,000 genes. That was one estimate. Well, when they got in there and started looking, it turns out we think that humans only have in the same ballpark close to 25,000 genes. We don't have that many more genes than much simpler organism, like a fly or a worm. But I would argue we're more complicated, right? We're much more complex. So somehow we use a similar set of instruction.
Maybe with 2,500, you say?
25,000.
Maybe with 25,000, it leaves more combinations.
Yeah.
Than
yeah.
Because
I think that's part of it.
Have you ever thought that all these people that have lived on the earth,
Mm-hmm.
how many look exact? I say you look like John Malkovich.
Right.
But the reality is, no, there's a bunch of differences.
Yeah.
So how can they have all of these billions and billions of people that have lived since the start of time, and no two people have the same face?
Yeah. Yeah. It's everybody's.
That's
just
because of
a
these
little bit
25,000.
unique combinations. Yeah. How are you different from your parents? And
then also your environment can change that, right? I guess, like the sun hitting your.
I think yeah. In some ways, the environment can change.
I remember watching TV years ago, and this girl was trying to go to school, and her dad didn't want her to, and she said she finally convinced him that you could see atoms or bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Little House on the Prairie, actually, and she convinced him to let her go to school because she got a microscope and showed him that there were living bacteria.
Something he couldn't see.
They would have no idea of this thing that they've discovered called DNA and chromosomes and genes, right?
Right. No.
Is there something else that's going to go deeper than that we're not aware of later? Beyond that?
I would guess yes. This is, I think, in terms of DNA, you can. This is something you just get smaller and smaller, right? DNA it's a chemical. It's a molecule made up of smaller atoms and.
So DNA, you couldn't hold a DNA. DNA is a word for a group of things.
Yeah. Deoxyribonucleic acids. It's a chemical molecule. Yeah. But yeah.
Much like coffee, just more complex.
I don't want to say you can't hold it. You just would. You could hold it. You just wouldn't be able to see that you were holding it.
Could you take somebody's genome, right? Genetics, and read it and say, well, your baby's going to have blue eyes. It's going to be 6'1". It's going to be right-handed.
You could get an educated guess on those. Now,
by looking at genetics and genome, what do they know pretty well for sure now? You could look at and tell.
Well, I mean, you could just look at DNA. And certainly tell things like the gender. You could make again. I think you could make a pretty solid guess and be most likely right on things like eye color, height, hair, things like that, physical characteristics. There are a lot of different types of disease traits that you could make a call and say, well, just looking at DNA sequence and say this person would have cystic fibrosis, or this person would have Huntington's disease, what I studied in graduate school, just by looking at the letter code.
The letter code being the genome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the 3 billion or so letters. But if you know where to look, you can make those calls. Have you ever done like an ancestry DNA test?
No, but I'm familiar with it.
Things like that, too. They can look and make
through your blood. What are they getting?
They're getting DNA, either blood, or you can even give like a saliva sample, with some.
So they're getting
cells.
your strand.
They're getting what they'll do with that is basically take the cells and break them up and extract the DNA out and sequence it. So this is something, I told you when I graduated college, they finished the first human genome. It was almost $3 billion, right? It costs a lot of money. Nowadays, you can swab your own cheek, send it in to Ancestry.com,
and they'll pay
spend
you
a couple $100 maybe, and you can get. They might not give you the entire 3 billion letters, but they'll sequence different places and say, okay, well, we think you've got 20% Irish ancestry, and so you can tell things like that as well. A little bit about where your ancestors came from, and risks for different types of diseases potentially.
On the average, I'm sure, right?
Yeah,
on the broad average.
That's the thing is, for most human traits, even eye color, for example. There's not just one gene. So there's not one gene, and that is the one gene that will determine your eye color. There are several, and so you could look at one gene and say, okay, this gene looks like you'll have blue eyes, but you may have brown eye copies in 5 other ones, and so the combination of all of those together, you'll have brown eyes. And so for most traits, it's more complex than just a yes or no answer. Are you going to have high blood pressure? Well, we can estimate
you lean
your
that
risk.
way.
Yeah, we can estimate your risk, but it's hard to say 100% certainty.
It's almost like reading a horoscope. It would say,
okay,
you're going to have a happy day.
Yeah.
And you say, well, maybe
That
I
makes
did,
me-
maybe
that
I
makes me
didn't.
happy when I read that.
Yeah.
So I'm off to a good start.
But so that would, so I always thought genetics and DNA were a set in stone, but it's not. It's just kind of a theory.
Yeah. So the DNA is that you carry in your cells is pretty set, but it can change even in individual cells. Like we were talking about was if you get a sunburn, that can cause new mutations or changes. So mutations are when it changes. So DNA is not set in stone. It does change, and that adds variety as well, right? You talked about no two people are exactly alike. Part of that is because there's constantly new variation that's being introduced.
So you can introduce your own variations, maybe. Let's say you eat. Some people say if you eat a lot of carrots, you'll get a glow, like a suntan.
Yeah.
So you have changed.
But that would not necessarily be changing your DNA, just to alter, something like your
Temporary.
Yeah, skin pigment or something. That would be temporary. I would imagine. I'm not sure what eating carrots exactly would do, but I imagine if you cut them out of your diet, it would go back to how it was.
Yeah,
before.
right. Yeah,
Right.
so it'd just be a temporary thing.
Right.
But
That'd be more environmental.
Yeah, rather than DNA is more. You're wired. That as the old timers used to say, that's the way you're wired.
That's the way you're wired. Exactly.
They knew what they was talking about. They just didn't have it.
Yeah. Isn't it funny how
It
the
really
old-timers-
is funny that there's not much that's changed. just the definitions or the language.
Yeah.
I bet you could get into Poor Richard's Almanac and read it and probably find something similar to what we're talking about, just not on a scientific level.
Maybe so. Yeah. No, I think there's probably some truth to that. But so you're talking about can we change it ourselves? So I think things like altering what you eat won't necessarily change your DNA, but there are newer technologies that are out there now where you can actually go in and change
and affect
DNA.
This 6 feet.
Change it in a laboratory. So
you would have to have something go in the body and find that strand that you said if you took it out it was 6 foot long, and that would go out and target this one little section here.
Yep. And we can do that. Actually, just, I don't know, about a year ago, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded for this discovery of a DNA editing technology that's being used now even in some clinical trials to treat diseases like certain types of blood disorders and cancer treatments.
How would this process work where they would go in and do that? It'd be with us.
So there are a couple types of DNA editing technologies. The one that's gotten the most attention in the news and they won the Nobel Prize for is one called CRISPR. And we actually, when your son was in my class, we read a couple papers about this technology. So it basically works. You need to know what part of the code you're wanting to change, right? So if you were able to stretch it all out on a table, you need to know, okay, this is the segment that I'm looking for, and you basically create in a lab. You can create what's called a guide RNA. It's a molecule that will guide you to that one spot out of all the 3
What makes it want to
letters.
go to that spot?
It's complementary. So this is one of the unique things about the structure of you've heard of Watson and Crick, or you've seen a picture of a double helix of DNA. Have you seen that, the DNA helix? So that's the basic structure of the molecule DNA. It was discovered back in the 1950s. And so one of the unique features of DNA is that there are 2 strands, okay? And they bind together with chemical interactions, and then they make that helical spiral that you've seen.
Leonardo da Vinci painted it.
Yeah.
Actually, I think. Was it da Vinci?
Maybe not DNA, but...
he painted something that was very similar to that.
Yeah.
And they've always wondered if that was it.
Yeah.
Some people think the snake around the medical pole was that.
Is that right? I've heard different things about the snake, but I've heard that is. Have you ever read the story in I think it's in Exodus where in the Old Testament, right? Moses is leading the Israelites out and they're grumbling and
that was after the manna, right?
Yeah, they're grumbling and complaining, and then the snakes come out and people are getting bit by poisonous snakes, and he makes a statue.
I thought that was it, but I heard somebody else use that twist.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So today I was out, this morning we went out, and I was getting some concrete off of some asphalt. So I went and got some muriatic acid, brought it out, and the muriatic acid literally went to the concrete rather than the asphalt. I thought, boy, this is really strange. So the muriatic wanted to connect to the concrete, and it didn't want to connect to the asphalt. So this DNA editing, somehow or another they figured out how to send this thing in there that only connects to that.
It is. And again, I got a little distracted there. So when Watson and Crick, so Jim Watson and Francis Crick, famous geneticists, when they discovered the structure of DNA, so I told you there are these 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. What they found was when you look at the 2 strands, if there's an A on one side, there's always a T on the other. If there's a C here, there's always a G. So there's a pairing, a complementarity that each letter has its unique partner. And so if you know the sequence that you're wanting to edit, maybe it's a AT, right? If you know the sequence, you can design a molecule that is a perfect partner to it. And so those are what we call a guide RNA. You can design a guide RNA that will go right to that specific sequence.
Like the muriatic acid.
Exactly. And it's just the way that the chemistry of DNA works, you can do that. And
so you can almost trick it into.
Mm-hmm. So the only thing you need to know is what is the code or the sequence of the part that I want to go to. And the way these editing technologies work, the way CRISPR works, for example, is you target to that one spot, and there's a protein that gets targeted at that spot, and it makes a cut. It actually takes the double-stranded chromosomal DNA and cuts it and separates the two pieces, and then it uses your own cells. Our cells have DNA repair machinery that can repair chromosome breaks. And so if it detects, hey, there's a break here, your cell will go to work and start to repair it, and it incorporates the edit that you introduced when your cell repairs the DNA. And so,
so for instance, I wrecked on my bicycle last week.
Oh.
Scratched my arm right here, cut it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that it's been filling in with something. So that's similar to, I cut it, such as the DNA, and my body is filling it in.
Yeah.
So the body would fill in this DNA.
Exactly. So.
So if I engineered something to put here that intercepted it, then I could do whatever.
Yeah. So the main difference here is on scale, right?
Yeah,
this is
the
way
scale.
Bigger.
That's all it is.
But yeah, it's a similar idea. So our bodies have the ability to repair damage. At the cellular level, you have a damage to a tissue, or you scraped your elbow. Even at the molecular level, if there's DNA damage, there are checkpoints that get triggered and say, "Hey, wait a second," because we don't want to damage our DNA. You need it. You need to keep that information intact, and so the cells will go to work and fix it.
Boy, that's complicated. Now I've just got to thinking, what makes the body want to do that?
Well, what happens if you damage your DNA? If there was too much damage, then the cell would die. Okay, and so if you have one or two cells in your skin die, that's no big deal. But if enough cells in your body die, then the rest of you goes too. So there's at the most basic, fundamental level, you want to keep your DNA intact because it's required for survival.
Now a worm will regenerate itself.
Yeah. Is
that similar?
Worms, well, the ones that can regenerate, that is a different thing. I don't know a lot about regeneration, but
you think it's a different thing?
Yeah. But it's similar to what you're talking about though with your skin. But there's certain worms, like you can remove their head even.
It'll grow another head.
Right? Now, as far as I know, we haven't figured out how to do that. You can scrape your elbow and it'll heal, but if you accidentally took off your arm at the elbow, that won't grow back.
So they're sending stuff in here that they can send stuff in. This CRISPR, what do they do? They figured out how to edit the gene to do what?
So, well, there are a lot of ways it can be used, but what's interesting, it's started to be used in humans to some degree to treat diseases. So where it's being tested right now, so they're doing clinical trials, is mostly in blood diseases. The reason I think they're starting out with blood disorders is because you can take blood out of the patient, you can manipulate it in the lab, and then re-infuse it right back
and
in.
take it back out if something goes wrong, maybe.
Yeah. So in that case, you can take some blood cells out, maybe blood stem cells, and edit them to. So, for instance, what if you had sickle cell anemia, right? Sickle cell anemia can be deadly, can be cause a lot of pain and suffering, but we know the gene that causes it. And what if you could take that patient's own blood cells out, and right where the mutation that they carry is, what if you could make a cut and repair it, and then put the cells back
Make a cut, let the body repair it.
in? Yeah, but in this case, you can actually introduce, along with it, you can make a cut and introduce a little segment of DNA that has the right code, and say, here, use this, when you're repairing it, use this to make a copy. And so that's one way that it's being used now, and some of the early clinical trials, really in this last year of in humans, some of the early clinical trials have shown promise. So what doesn't happen, as far as I know, they haven't been able to edit every cell, right? But,
in the blood?
Yeah, but in the case of something like sickle cell anemia, what if you could fix it in 90% of the cells? That's probably effectively, that'd be good enough effectively for it to be a cure. And so,
Or
otherwise,
get you down to the average.
Yeah,
Maybe I've
yeah.
got some traits of that sickle cell anemia too, but
Maybe
not
so.
not enough to.
Right. That's the thing. I think. So there's a lot of promise in those types of areas. Now you get to other things like talk to like a neurodegenerative, like Alzheimer's disease. What if you knew the gene that was causing it? Could you go in and fix it? I think it's a little bit. In theory, you could do it, but it's a little bit more difficult of a problem because you can't take the brain out and go in and edit it, like you can.
And
blood cells.
doesn't that have to do with the firing of the cells and the electricity?
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, the way.
So it's
the
not
way
just necessarily
communicate.
mechanics.
Right.
It's more electricity too,
Yeah.
maybe.
But if there's an underlying genetic, if there's a gene mutation that's underlying a disease, if you could fix the gene so that it no longer caused a problem, then again, the body has the ability to sort of bounce back and repair itself. And so, if you can go in, fix the underlying problem, most often the body will bounce right back.
And maybe the body will fix the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe it learns up.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
I think so. Yeah. So that's the thing. I think in the next 10 years, DNA editing in human diseases is going to be more common. And I think it'll start with blood diseases or in certain types of cancer therapies where it's being used now. I think we'll hear more about that. And then maybe if that works well, maybe other things down the road as well.
So you're almost telling the body to fix it. You're almost breaking it so the body will fix it and giving them some directions on how to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, what you need to know up front is, where is the problem? Where's the mutation? And now we have the ability to go in and make changes to it. Yeah, it's not as simple as all that.
No. But it would take a real smart person to discover it, and the smart one would be the one that is able to lay it out and give it all these numbers, A, T, and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because somebody had to come up with a system.
Yeah, that's the thing I think that is fascinating just about science history. I'm a biologist. I get sort of geek out over biology, but any big discovery, I think in any field, somebody found something, and then when you think about technology, somebody found something that already existed but came up with a way maybe to recreate it or to use it in a different way. So this DNA editing technology that we were just talking about, they didn't invent it from scratch. They actually discovered it in bacteria. Bacteria already had a way to do this, not to edit their genes just anywhere, but bacteria use this system if they ever get infected with a virus. They will, if they survive the viral infection, they'll take a piece of this virus and make a cut in their chromosome, and they insert that piece of the virus. And then they express that little piece of the viral DNA, and if they ever get infected with that virus again, their cells will recognize it and chop it up, and it kills the virus before the virus has a chance to replicate. So the system was already there. Somebody who was studying bacteria found this weird little segment of the bacterial chromosome and said, well, I wonder what this does. As they studied it, they found out that this is like a little, almost like a little gene segment in the bacteria where they vaccinate themselves. If you ever get infected with that same virus, you're going to recognize it and chop it up. But the people who discovered it, that was interesting if you're interested in bacteria and how they survive viral infections. But the people who discovered that had this sort of next step leap. They said, well, what if we tweaked this one part, and instead of using a bacterial virus sequence, what if we designed our own sequence to guide it to any other gene? Would we be able to use it in mice or flies or humans? And it turns out, yes, you can use it in any organism, even humans, and it still works. You just have to create the guide to tell it where to go and make a cut.
And I guess people that used to breed cows and horses and dogs, they were doing the same thing, just on a very primitive.
Yeah.
We just didn't know that they could do it.
Humans have been doing genetics as far back as human history. Any type of agriculture where you're selecting, I want my corn have bigger, more delicious.
Yeah, didn't the Indians just have those little maize or something? Or is that corn? No, they had little.
I think it's called the teosinte. Is the wild plant that corn was
bred from. But same thing.
That's genetics. In that case, they were using what we call artificial selection. Maybe you have one plant that has a little bit of bigger seed or fruit. And you say, I like that one. I'm going to save that and try to make more of it next season. Or if you have a cow that produces more milk, maybe that's the one that you breed for your flock or something like that.
If I go to the farmer's market and I go to these stands, I love tomatoes, and I say, what kind are them? Mm-hmm. There's always a different name. Yeah. There's more names to these tomatoes. Now, were they always there, or were these things were, we call these, I got some the other day that were German something. Yeah. Where they got that name, I don't know. But somebody stuck a twig in a beefsteak tomato, and they called it this. So we've been doing this.
Yes.
We just didn't know that we could do it on the level of solving problems.
Yeah. So what that is, if you're doing what we call artificial selection. If you have a variety of a tomato plant or a sheep or a goat or whatever, and you say I like this variety, you can try to set up breeding to make more of that, and you select traits. That's we've got two little Yorkies in our house, right? These little dogs, they're I guess all descended from wild dogs or wolves or something at some point, but you look around at
they
all
were
the
not
were
not running wild 1,000 years ago, were they? They couldn't made it.
No, absolutely not. I mean, if you look at all the variety of dogs, that's the same thing. It's they all are just sort of being selected for different traits. I want them to have short legs and a long body, or droopy ears, or so you choose the ones that you like the traits and say, try to make more of those.
But genetics Genetic biology, like CRISPR, is trying to do this for the greater good in helping diseases.
Yeah, yeah.
And so in time, if we go back to the like when computers first came out, you had this make this funny noise and it did the dial up something, and you put something in there and you have to type in this code and hit return, and it at sums and everything.
Yes.
And now I just got a new computer last week from Computers of Cleveland, and that thing's faster than we can think.
Yeah.
And it does the same thing. And that's been in what? 20 years?
Right.
Because this is the, and then you go back to the 1940 or whenever trains came out, and they advanced hugely. So did manufacturing.
Yeah.
So I think the next 20 years is going to be all about medical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just genetics, the
Yeah.
same thing. It's all going to be about the human body and biology. So
I think there's a lot of potential technology breakthroughs that'll be coming in that area.
do you
for
think
sure.
they'll ever be able to make people that like to smoke, instead of saying you need to quit smoking, say you need to start taking this genetic so-and-so and it'll train your body not to be affected by smoke?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could see that as a possibility. Yeah.
I mean, if it could do it,
Yeah. It'd be interesting.
I mean, people would go in and get this thing before they had kids.
Yeah.
It'd be artificial selection rather than.
Yeah. This is where you get into some kind of crazy potential scenarios and ethical considerations come in too.
So was the internet in
Yeah.
the beginning. And that happened quick. So this is around the corner. So the ethical stuff is you can go forever on that.
Sure. So what I was just talking about, let's take DNA editing as an example. It's being used to try to treat human diseases today. In the United States, and as far as I know, most countries, there may be some that don't have a specific law, but most places it's illegal to use that same technology on like a, if say you wanted to do in vitro fertilization and make a few tweaks before you implanted those babies, that's illegal. But a couple years ago, there was a group in China that did it. They used the same technology to edit babies and then implanted them. So there are at least 2 humans on the planet.
Is anybody following them? Can you look them up on YouTube?
They did not release the identities of the kids.
You're not one of them, right?
As far as I know, it wasn't me. My parents never told me. So no, I'm sure somebody is following them, but they never actually released. The scientist who did the work, there was a big backlash. He may still be in jail, and there was a big backlash over it. But the technology could be used to do just that. In this case. He went in, the father was HIV positive and the mother was not. And so, his rationale was, well, these babies will be at a higher risk for exposure to HIV. So what if we could edit their DNA to make them resistant to HIV? So the virus, in order to infect a cell, it has to bind to a receptor on the cell. So he basically edited that receptor and tried to make them resistant to HIV infection, and it didn't work perfectly in one of the babies, according to the reports, but it worked in the other one. And otherwise, they seemed to be healthy. But again, because it was a minor child and family, they kept the identities.
We won't know the rest of that story for years.
I imagine, when when they turn 18, they'll come out to the world and say, "Here we are, the first genetically modified human beings."
But if you could genetically engineer them not to have a specific disease, why not do it before the baby's born rather than after?
Yeah. Right. So again, this is where people who ask these sort of bioethical questions, right? Bioethical. So
that's a new term.
What's the ethical way to move forward with new sort of biological or medical technologies? There are people who do this for a living, right? And those conversations are going on. I don't think there's the problem with questions like that is there's not a consensus where everybody agrees, and so there's a lot of disagreement in this area. Would it be okay to edit a baby before they're born? If you knew that they were going to have, let's say, if you knew they were going to have
any birth defect,
breast cancer, when later on in life. A lot of people would say yes, but what if you knew they were going to have high cholesterol? Would you want to do it then? Well, maybe still, but you could deal with that in other ways, and so it's a difficult sort of question.
He's going to be tall, but he's going to be fat.
What do you allow? Right.
Yeah.
Do you want to have a boy or a girl? Like where do you draw the line to say we'll allow this but not that? And so it's I think with any new technology, those are types of questions that have to be asked. But when you're talking about changing human beings, that to me that's at another level.
If you can do it, I think it's okay to do it. If you can do it, you can do it, it must be ethical. Does that make sense?
Just if you can do it.
Yeah, if you could change, if you could do it, so go back to Frankenstein. What was wrong with that? Was that wrong for them to try to create Frankenstein?
Seems like it was a bad idea.
But why? I mean, if it was wrong to try to create a Frankenstein.
Yeah.
If it wasn't wrong, then editing somebody's DNA before they're born would not be wrong either.
Yeah,
I guess.
So this is something, I have kids, right? We make decisions for them as they're little, when they needed to go to the doctor and not. But this is one sort of argument against is if you're going to make a change like that could not only affect that person, but even they would then potentially pass that on to their kids and grandkids and for generations to come. They have no say in it, right? So what if I just told you, hey, you were too little, but I made this call for you and I made this change, and then you grew up and
you're too tall.
It turned out that it wasn't, you're not happy with it. What do you do about it?
All right, now let's take this to a further level, or more basic. You could say that in a very basic way, I edited my children's genes by marrying a girl that was not 6 foot tall. In a sense, I edited it there. There was no chance they were going to be blonde-headed.
Well, you still have. I mean, you did not go in and change anything. Now you did choose a wife, right? So that does sort of limit
I edited
what you're working with, but you didn't have the control over it. I think it is.
Well, I did have the control. I could have not married, I could have not married or had sex with her.
That's
I
true.
could have chosen somebody that was tall.
Yeah. But
or blonde-headed.
Would that have guaranteed your kids would have been tall?
It'd have been trying.
It would have increased the odds.
The odds.
But wouldn't have guaranteed it. There's still.
So boy, this gets deep. This gets deeper. See, we're trying to answer a question we don't even know if they can do yet.
There's still, yeah.
I think
that's the thing is, in nature, there's an element of, it's variability and chance, and you pick a wife. Hopefully, you have healthy kids, but you don't have the ability up front when you go to that first doctor's appointment to say, okay, I want a picture of the ultrasound, and could you while you're there, could you make a few tweaks? I'd like
him to be smart.
Yeah,
and the doctor would say,
I'm 5'6", so I'd like my kid to be,
He'd say, you should have thought about this
taller than that,
Have you ever watched that movie? You ever seen Monty Python? I'm sure, right?
I've seen the Holy Grail.
Remember when they were sitting in the stands and he said they were arguing about if a man could have a baby, would he have the right? And the argument, it was a really far-fetched thought then, but just because they couldn't agree on that answer, it started a war. and going down here 30 years later, this is starting a war. So these questions, I don't know. I just think if you can do it, it's probably okay. If you can do it. If you can't do it, then it must not be okay.
Well, my feel on it, I am generally in favor of new technology and trying things out, but I think anytime you're in genetics, anytime you're changing genes that will also be passed on to future generations, especially when it's a new technology like this is. We don't know if there may be other changes that are happening that we're unaware of.
It affects other things.
And so I think moving with caution, moving slowly is important. And then the other thing in my mind that's very important is that things be done transparently, in the open, in conversation with lots of different people who should be at the table to have a say. So scientists and doctors and patients definitely, right? But people in the community leaders, politicians, and faith leaders, and people who are ethicists who think about ethical problems, and I think all these people need to be a part of the conversation. And this was the guy in China I told you about. Part of why he got in trouble is sort of done in secret, and then after the fact he came out and made this announcement, thinking, I'm going to be famous for this. And, he sort of is, but he didn't get the response that he was anticipating, I think. But it was done in secret, and then when it came out, people were like, "Oh my goodness, we're not ready for that." And so,
if we were ready for it and we could answer the question easier, it would probably advance quicker. This study.
Yeah. I do think. I think it has the potential to move forward quickly. And some of those questions about long term, what are the possibility of off-target effects? Those are things that you can't answer unless you try it. And so I think some of the things that are going on now, to try to test out the technology in different ways, hopefully will bring answers to that. This is to use a current example. These vaccines that have people have all kinds of opinions. There's this new type of vaccine, right, for the COVID vaccine. It's, vaccines are not new, but there's a new type. These RNA vaccines, a little bit different technology, and a lot of people are uneasy about that because hey, I don't want to be the one that you're trying this thing out on, and so it's the same kind of thing. I think 10 years from now, if these have been going and there's a good track record and most people have had them and did well and stuff, then I don't think we'll have that sort of backlash. But
No.
Right now, that's not the case.
It's just a new thing.
In part because it's new. Yeah. So that's the sort of thing. I think it makes sense. You feel more comfortable with something that you can look and see, hey, there's a track record of success here, versus being the guinea pig where something's tested on. I think there's some wisdom in that. That makes sense.
Have you ever seen the movie Horton Hears a Who?
Yes.
You ever think about that when we're talking about these things?
Is there a tiny little civilization in there somewhere that we can't?
That was what Horton was hearing, right? A who?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the difference between what we're talking about and you look in a telescope and see billions of planets and billions of stars and all this stuff, and now we're turning this telescope the other way, and we're looking into ourselves and seeing billions, and now it's not molecules, it's atoms, and it's protons and neutrons, and now it's chromosomes, and we don't even know what's beyond there.
Yeah.
We can't even prove it unless we have a telescope.
Yeah. No, I think I guess there's some similarity there. I had a friend, the apartments that we lived in when I was doing my postdoctoral fellowship. He was working on his PhD in theoretical physics, and these guys, really smart, right? Theoretical physics. I mean, these guys are math wizards, but they spend their days, trying to, build, mathematically sound sort of proofs for the possibility of things that you just can't even detect.
Like
right?
the Big Bang Theory. Sheldon was always doing that.
You talk about string theory or things like that. You're trying to come up with physical explanations for things that maybe we can observe effects for, but we don't know what's causing it. So there's a whole world of exploration there where you're really just trying to come up with a mathematical explanation for something that's just unobservable.
Why does human nature want to come up with a mathematical explanation for everything? It's like it does not exist, and unless you can prove it mathematically, it does not exist. Am I right?
Well, I think that's a very sort of scientific way of thinking.
Or it's all we got.
Things. Yeah. But
in order to prove something,
right?
Me and you both have to agree that this is a 1 and that's a 2 and 1 + 2 = 3. We have to agree on that. Now we're using this thing at a much more complicated thing to prove something else. It's just bizarre. But that's the only way we have to prove stuff is through mathematics, right?
But then it gets so specialized, right? That you might have two mathematicians that agree, but none of the rest of us understand what they're talking about. So then do you just take their word for it and say, well, they know what they're talking about. They look really smart.
I mean, could I prove mathematically that you're sitting here? I don't know how I would do it. But if I can't prove you're sitting here mathematically, then these smart people would say you're not sitting here because I can't prove it mathematically.
Yeah, I don't know. You should just invite them in, and we could.
They'd think I was crazy, wouldn't they?
I think that's the thing. Sort of when you think about science, we try to come up with explanations that one person can agree with. Now, in the case of me sitting here, I think if you could show it and then reproduce it or have someone else that also agreed, you're starting to build a consensus there. I don't know.
So you're saying proof is not always mathematically.
Yeah. Generally that's I think for science, math is generally it's a common feature of it. But
I can prove you're here. I can touch you.
Yeah.
But I can't prove it mathematically.
It's interesting though. So is that all there is? That's all. That's your question, right?
Well, the scientists say that's all there is if you can't prove it mathematically.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're always leaning towards. So why can't something be true even if I can't prove it mathematically?
Well, I would call myself a scientist, but I'm also a person of faith, and I think God is one of these.
Have you ever seen those people try to prove God's real through math? They're doing all this chalkboard stuff.
Well, I mean, I've read and heard people give arguments for God based off of probabilities.
Yeah.
Which again, I find those to be interesting and compelling. But again, the idea of them as a foolproof proof that everyone will once I see this, now you've proven it to me. I don't. To me, God transcends.
The old timers would say proof's in the pudding.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know what that meant. What could that possibly mean? Proof's in the pudding.
I don't know.
They always said the proof's in the pudding.
You have to taste it to see if you like it.
I guess.
I think that might be what they're talking about.
But they couldn't prove it mathematically, maybe.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
Where is this whole thing going? Star Trek. Now, Star Trek. Did you ever watch much Star Trek?
I did some, yeah. My mom was
Trekkie?
the old TV series.
That's what I am.
She had
the Trekkie.
When I was a kid, she had VHS cassettes of the old Star Trek series. Yeah.
So we've done a lot of the stuff they've done, such as this biological engineering. I mean, they were doing that.
Uh-huh.
But they got into transforming through. What do you call that?
The transport.
Teleporting.
Yeah.
Teleporting.
Yeah.
I guess they teleported
Beam
the
me
genome.
Up. Beam me up.
The chromosomes.
Yeah.
What makes you interested in this stuff?
Well,
where did you change to this?
Yeah. I think I grew up, I always enjoyed nature. I grew up, I loved to be outside and to catch animals, and I'd have a little aquarium where I caught things and would watch them for a while and stuff. So I think biology I always was interested in. When I started college, my plan was to become a physical therapist. Really, for no other reason than I liked biology. I could be a biology major, and I knew a physical therapist in high school that we volunteered a little bit in the hospital, and I could do that. That looks like fun. But I ended up in college. I think is the first time that I really engaged in just studying for the joy of it, and really became someone who just enjoyed being a student. And so
of science?
Yeah.
Or biology?
just biology, but genetics I think was one of, if not my favorite class that I took in college. So that's kind of what.
Was it the teacher that made you like it?
The teacher, yeah, maybe so, and just I don't know, just the subject. You think everything in biology, right? If you like plants or animals, or if you're interested in human diseases or medicine, everything in biology at some level boils down to the genes that are driving the cells to do what they do, and the characteristics that we see and observe in different things. There's a genetic component to it. So if you like biology, genetics is sort of the fundamental science of biology. It's only one area of biology, but I think it sort of builds the foundation for everything else. So that I think is what kind of turned me onto it. And I think it was timing. Again, right around the time when I was finishing college, there was all this excitement and new opportunities in the area of genetics that were just opening up. And so that got me excited about studying it in graduate school. So.
Do you think genetics may be the reason that you're going for the reason?
The reason I'm going
Isn't genetics the reason? Sort of like, why is this or that? Genetics is not necessarily how we can change it, but maybe it's the reason that this is this. Does that make sense? It's also studying genetics and being able to alter them has these benefits, and it could solve these problems. But it also may tell us the reason.
Sure.
Am I making sense? I mean, the reason, in other words, if I said, well, I worry about these things, it's just my genetics. The reason is not because I'm worried about these things, but because that's in my chromosome.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm wired that way.
Yeah. I think to me, there is an aspect of that's a draw, but the more that I have been around and studied genetics and just been a person and interact with other people, I just think I think on some level there's a truth to that. A lot of what we do, the way we act or respond, or the things that we care about, I think there's something biological about that. But I think there's also other things that influence how we go about life, right? The things that we care about, or the whys that drive us, I think are also shaped by other forces than just biology, right? Your environment and sort of your own life experiences are going to also impact the things that matter to you. I do think there's always probably a genetic or biological underlying that also has a strong influence. But I would resist saying that your genetics explains everything about you.
No, you would not know if it's nature or nurture or your raising or where you was raised after high school, where you went after high school or before high school, or the teacher you had. We don't know what influences us.
Well, I don't think it's an either or though, right? I think the answer is yes, all of those things.
Everything influences.
Yeah, I think so. And so the idea of an argument between nature versus nurture, I think yes, nature is gonna influence, and sometimes that influence may be too strong to overcome, maybe not. Nurture, your environment, that's going to have an influence, but I think they interact, they work together. So to say it's either this or that, to me, it seems like a false decision.
See, like I used to get my hair cut for this guy, and he used to tell me that you can do anything you want to. You can do anything you want to. And he just wore me out with that. So one day I said, what if you're sitting in jail? You can't do whatever you want to.
Right.
So there are limitations to what we can do.
Sure.
You know, it's not people say you can do anything you want to, or you can't.
Right.
I can't play basketball.
Yeah.
I'm never going to play basketball.
Well, you could play basketball.
I could play, but I'm not going to win.
Right. Yeah.
They're not going to pick me. They're not going to pick me.
Well, you could win if you played against somebody that's worse than you. You know.
Yeah. But I'm not. Nobody's going to come and pay $80 a ticket to see me play basketball.
Yeah. So you're telling me that you have
there's limitations.
Some guardrails that biology has set some limits on what you're able to do.
And if biology sets the limits, maybe my mind sets limits on other stuff that I can't go past either. Mm-hmm. And they're just as strong as these other guardrails.
Yeah. I think
so. I don't know.
That's probably true. Yeah.
So if a person was going to be a perfect person, he'd get a geneticist to redo his genome. He would get a psychologist to solve his mental issues.
Yeah. That would be.
Do you ever inspire to like discover something else in biology, or is you just teaching it is where you're at?
I'm mostly teaching now. I still do some research with students and side projects here at Lee since I've been coming, but there's less time for it. But yeah, I do still enjoy that part. I enjoy doing research with students also as a teaching tool. So, you can go in a classroom and, dissect or dive into different material from a textbook, but when you're in the lab, it's a different way of learning. You're asking, how could I design an experiment that might lead me a little closer to understanding this thing.
Somebody's got to.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to go past the book.
Yeah. So I've got, some projects that we still do some work on. When I was doing my postdoctoral fellowship, we were trying to identify genes that cause cancer, and so I've got some different genes that we pulled out of my experiments that are still somewhat uncharacterized. We know a little bit about them, but just trying to understand what they actually do if you express them in different cell types. And so we do still have some research going on. It's basic kind of biology research. So
when y'all are in there doing that,
uh-huh.
You wear a coat, like a smock. What do you call that?
Yeah. We do have. So don't tell my students. I don't always wear a lab coat. This is in the teaching labs. It's kind of the official gear, right? So we have to wear lab coats when we're in lab. But it depends on what I'm doing. If I'm in there just on my own, I don't usually wear a lab coat, but I do wear gloves. Mm-hmm. But I tell my students too, when we're working with DNA or we do cell culturing like cancer cell lines in the lab, and we wear gloves always for that kind of work. I tell them, what we're working with, it won't hurt you really, but you can contaminate it. So I was like, I want you to wear gloves, not to protect you so much as I want to protect your experiment from your hands, because we've got bacteria and just different things on our hands that can contaminate. So, but we have lab coats. If people are looking, I usually throw my coat on because that's the official department policy. It's funny. I think because it's teaching labs, and we're trying to just have a similar protocol.
Play the part.
I never wore lab coats when I was doing postdoctoral research. The only time I ever wore them is there were a few experiments where I was working with radiation, or I did one little experiment where I was doing some viral culture that if I accidentally infected myself, I could give myself this virus, and I didn't want that. But in general, the stuff that I do, it's not like in a chemistry lab where you might, if you get this on you, you might burn a hole in your skin. We don't work with a lot of harsh chemicals. So anyway. Yeah.
But if you wear a uniform, it gives you a certain level of playing the part.
Yeah.
Sort of like
you look the part.
If you were to stop me for speeding in this, I'd say, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
But if you had a police hat that's what uniforms are for, right?
Sure. Yeah. But this is one thing, if you're just working in a lab doing your own project. A lot of science is done in a community, but a lot of the hour-to-hour, day-to-day stuff, you kind of just work on your own thing. And so, in that time, like if you're just sitting at the bench working on your experiment, you might be there all alone. And so, I just
wear a lab coat.
I dress to be comfortable.
Yeah.
It depends on the setting, or if I'm gonna,
Did you ever watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang? Remember that show?
Years ago.
He always wore a lab coat.
Yeah.
Even when he was making breakfast.
This is what you're saying, though, right? That there's a look that we expect, right?
It may be that it was for a psychological effect, even for ourselves. I'm testing something.
Scientists, yeah.
I'm doing this here. Mm-hmm. But do you ever do any? If I was in your position, I would try to discover something.
Mm-hmm.
I would be the guy that discovered this and have my name on it. And be the guy that, that's what I would be wanting to do.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, there's a little bit less time. I do more teaching now than before, but in my field, the way that works is if you advance the field a little bit, your discoveries are recognized through publications.
Carry the ball further down the field.
Yeah. So the way we do that is to maybe present at meetings, and then when something is sort of solidly in the record is when you get it published.
To who?
There are academic journals for different disciplines, but science journals. So the process is actually pretty rigorous. So in order to get something published, you have to submit it. If the editor looks at it and says, okay, yeah, this looks interesting, they'll send it usually to 2 to 4 outside reviewers. So, they'll send it to people around the country that are in your area of expertise, and they'll say, hey, look at this, and tell us, do you think this is good work? And those reviewers usually come back and say, yeah, this is interesting, but it's got this weakness and this weakness and this weakness, and you shouldn't accept it unless they can address those problems. This is the peer review process, and so you can go back and forth, maybe go back, do some additional experiments, or try to address questions, and then resubmit. Once it gets through all of that, something gets published. That's how discoveries are made. And when new technologies, or if a new thing is discovered and named, it has to be published in a
peer. Is that what they call peer review?
So there's different. This is what you might read something that looks scientific, but there's a difference between if I just go to my living room and you say, okay, I'm gonna write this paper up and I'll post it out on Facebook.
Yeah.
Right. Here's science.
Yeah.
Or I've got a website. I'm gonna throw up an article.
Yeah. I'm a scientist and I published it. It must be science.
Yeah, but that's
not true.
If it's not gone through a peer review process, then it may be true and it may be good, but it may not. So I always tell my students, if you're trying to research something maybe for a paper, you need to be aware of what your source is here. Are you looking at something that has gone through that kind of rigor? If so, then we can be a little bit more confident that it's got some meat behind it.
And who says it's peer reviewed?
Right.
Right. You gotta get into that too. Is there an organization that says, okay, this has been peer reviewed and we're going to say this is true today?
Right. Well, the journals that publish are sort of those organizations, and so there's a hierarchy in different academic disciplines. This is not just biology, but there are certain journals that are sort of the top tier journals, and then they kind of drop.
And they could all be arbitrary. Could they all be arbitrary? I mean, there's not.
In my field, it is. I think there's probably some arbitrary nature. So really good things get published in different level journals, but the top journals are the ones that have the broadest readers. If you have readers from a lot of different disciplines, a lot of people are going to read the articles in that journal. That's going to be a little more prestigious, so it's harder to get published in those. So they're much more picky, much more rigorous, and they reject more than they accept. And so it really, that's one level of sort of tier to academic publications. That I do think there's some arbitrariness to it, but
do they have to publish who the peer was that reviewed it?
It's anonymous. It's anonymous, and so this is you get
could be
you
your
get
grandmother.
Feedback.
Could be your grandmother.
Well, it has to be someone in the field, but you get feedback, and you can argue points if you think that reviewer missed something or their point is not valid. You can argue that, but it's anonymous. So that's it's an interesting aspect to it where you might get a really negative review and you don't know where it came from.
You don't even know who to argue with.
Yeah, but in my experience, when I've published, it's actually usually is really helpful, because I think when you're working on a project, you think about it day in and day out. You think about it and you sort of get. Sometimes we can get in our rut. The peer review process actually. It's a different way of allowing you to see your work through someone else's eyes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they point out like really good points that you just never thought of. And I think in general, it leads to the work that is published being stronger than it was initially. I don't know
how else to do it. Do you?
Yeah. So if you build a home and nobody's going to come along and inspect it, you might be tempted to cut corners.
Sure.
Right?
Or might cut a corner and didn't know it.
Yeah. So
in other words, the inspectors are sort of peer reviewing it.
I think so. Except
in science, they're giving their opinion.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, when you publish an idea, you've got your results that suggest an explanation. Scientists, we generally just don't say, this proved this, right?
Never.
Rather, what you're going to say is, based on what I observed, it's consistent with this explanation. So we think our results are in line with this as sort of the best working model that we have. I think that drives people a little bit crazy sometimes.
Well, they stop reading.
Yeah, you just want to say, okay, just tell me, you know.
Well, and they'll say meta-analysis, and they all follow that same thing: abstract, so and so, conclusion, but summary. You know, you just keep reading till it agrees with you.
Yes. So, but anyway, yeah, I think that the peer review process to me has been helpful. And actually, when I was a graduate student, the first paper I ever published, we submitted it to a good journal and it got rejected. But the reviewers came back with some really good suggestions. So instead of resubmitting it, we pulled it back, did some new experiments, added to the paper, and then we submitted it to a better journal, and it got accepted on the resubmission. And so I was really thankful. I wasn't at first. At first, I was really.
So
disappointed.
you submitted a paper that's been peer reviewed and published.
Yeah.
What was it on?
I've got a couple. Neurodegenerative disease and Huntington's disease, and then cancer genetics, cancer biology. Yeah.
Is that an accomplishment to have it recorded in a journal?
Yeah. I mean, that's in academic.
Seems to me
science,
like that's a thing.
I mean, that's kind of that is your resume piece, right? If you list out your accomplishments, you have your research interests, and if you just say I'm interested in this, this is the research I do, but you never published anything, then
it's not you. In other words, you're saying I came up with a theory and a study, and they liked it so much they took it upon themselves to publish it, print it, and waste their time and their space on it.
Yeah. And it, again, like we said before, you're just advancing the ball down the field a little bit, and so then other people might read that, and it give them an idea to branch off in their research in a different direction. So
and you could read a science publication, and you could read it and say, you know what? I wonder if they've ever thought about doing it with this instead of with that, and the next thing you know, they've come up with a huge idea that solves everything.
Yeah.
And they got it from reading this journal.
Yeah. And that's
an argument to get those magazines, the journals.
That's
right?
That's how it works. People come up with an idea or discovery, and then someone sees it, maybe thinks about it from a different direction, and take off with it and apply it in their system. Yeah.
Are you going to try to publish any more? Get any more?
I hope so.
You working on some?
I've got a cell culture project going. We've got a gene that we pulled out of an experiment that I did several years back. That seems like the gene is expressed at a higher level in a certain type of skin cancer, and so we think it might help to drive the development of the cancer, and just trying to characterize that more. So
isolate it.
Mm-hmm. We know what the gene is, and we can. I've got a copy of that gene sort of cloned so that I can express it in cells.
What do you mean express? What does that mean in layman's terms?
So I've got just that little segment of DNA, and we've got there are lab tricks where you can take DNA and just add it to cells, and they'll take it up, internalize it, and then they
do separate so they can join it.
Mm-hmm. In this case, this gene codes for a protein. So if the gene gets expressed,
absorbed,
it basically will lead to that cell making more of that protein, and we think that this protein helps to drive the proliferation of the cancer cells. So over time, that can give rise to the growth of a tumor. Anyway, we're trying to understand.
So you think you may have found the thing that causes the tumor to grow?
Yes.
Not that you figure out how to stop it, but just the thing.
Right. But I think again, from my perspective, those are the questions that I'm interested in as a biologist. Is kind of more the basic science. But I think if you can find what's causing cancer, for example,
reason,
then potentially those might be potential targets that you could design a drug for down the road.
But you're not necessarily interested in necessarily the next step, but just
right. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be something that I would be doing. I mean, I'm not going to try to synthesize a drug, and that's beyond our capabilities here. But this could potentially lead to here's a new gene that is involved in maybe various types of cancers, and if somebody saw that and had the interest or the capability, maybe they could pick it up and take it to the next step, drug design or something like that.
So your interest is finding the reason.
Yeah. Sort of. Yeah, the underlying kind of basic biology of.
Yeah, y'all take it from here. I found out. I found out why. Y'all take it from here.
Yeah, exactly. So this is again what I just call basic science. It's not directly trying to make a drug or a treatment.
But in a lot of ways, it's more important.
Well, I mean, I think if you want to understand why a drug works, you need to know what it's doing.
You can't fix the problem until you know what it is.
Yeah. So, I teach a cancer biology class at Lee. That's kind of one. I think it's my favorite class, and that's really if you look at the history of cancer treatment, a lot of the drugs that we have and still use today, they were discovered, maybe not on accident, but they were discovered to maybe be effective, but they didn't really know why. They didn't know what they were doing, in other words, initially. They just said, okay, we found this chemical that when we give it as a chemotherapy, it seems to kill the cancer, but causes a lot of other problems too, because it kills other cells. And so more often now, newer cancer drugs that have been developed in the last 10, 20 years, it's more common for them to be targeted, because now we're starting to understand what the actual underlying cause of the cancer is. Where in the 50s and 60s and 70s, that wasn't the case. So the actual cause of the cancer was a mystery, but we found some drugs that were helpful. Now it's sort of flipped.
Now we
know
can
the cause, and what if here's a gene that's mutated that causes this cancer. What if we could design a drug that targets that specific gene and doesn't have all the other nasty effects? So this is one of the most interesting cancer stories. I think one of the first, maybe the first chemotherapeutic drug that was shown to be effective in various blood cancers was nitrogen mustard, which was taken from mustard gas. So this was totally accidental, but in World War I, they developed all these chemical warfare, and there was an accident in World War II where the Germans flew over and bombed some ships that were at harbor, and one of them was carrying mustard gas, and it exploded, and all the soldiers that were on there that survived the bombing, they were exposed to this mustard gas, and it wiped out their bone marrow, their whole blood system. So these soldiers died usually within a few weeks. And somebody looked at that and said, "Whoa, mustard gas just killed all their blood cells. What if we gave it at a lower dose to a leukemia patient? These are blood cells that are just proliferating out of control. What if we gave mustard gas to them? And they tried it, and it worked. And they were able to, at least for a period of time, cause the leukemia to slow down. They didn't know why. It was sort of serendipitous, accidentally discovered. Well, now, we're sort of, I think drug design is working in a kind of backwards way now, where you try to identify what's the gene, and then try to target a drug that is tailored for that.
Sort of getting in front of it.
Yeah.
Some people say you got to get in front of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You don't have a lab at your house where you, like I ride bicycles as a hobby. Do you do this as a hobby, or do you have another hobby?
No, I do not. My hobbies, we're involved in our church. I like to sing. I sing in the choir there, so that's.
Where do you go to church?
We go to Westmore.
That's right here?
Here in town, yeah.
Eddie Cartwright?
Do I?
No, Eddie Cartwright doesn't go there.
No, Kelvin Page is the pastor there. But no, I don't know Eddie Cartwright. But
Westmore's just right down here.
Yeah, we just about a year ago moved down right off of exit 25. So it was right there at Keith Street and 25th, but we just moved right before
Jim
before
Elmore.
COVID.
Jim Elmore. Did you ever know Jim Elmore?
Jim Elmore.
Frank Lawson. They both went there.
Frank Lawson I've met.
He died. Jim died too.
I didn't grow up here. There are a lot of folks.
You go to school with Steve Hadaball.
I know Steve.
He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, he's a good guy. You guys bike together?
He's faster than I am.
Okay.
If you know him, he is like the perfect person, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he's a great guy.
What makes him so nice?
Yeah, it's genetics.
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
What do you sing in the choir?
He is a good guy. Do it.
What do you sing in the choir?
What part?
Or what tone? What do they call it?
I'm a tenor.
Tenor. Is that high?
Yeah, yeah. It's when I was in college, I sang in a choir and I was a bass. And there's something about singing bass. You feel like a man singing those deep notes, but I'm not really.
It didn't stop the
I'm
Bee
not really
Gees.
a true bass. But yeah, we sing the high notes. I feel sometimes they're a little too high for me, but.
See, the Bee Gees were tenors, right?
Oh yeah.
It didn't bother them, did it?
Not a bit. So that's.
What is there? Bass, tenor, soprano.
That's all we have for the men, and then soprano and alto are the women's. If you have.
What's alto?
Alto's kind of the lower women's.
Like what?
Um,
What would be like? Sing alto, sing something alto.
The alto part would be usually something like up there. So I mean it's high for a man,
high.
but that's kind of
so it's alto.
Yeah, that's
soprano,
that's
tenor, bass. So it gets lower as you go.
Tenor and bass are the guys.
You're just down just a notch.
Oh yeah. So.
What makes you want to sing choir?
My family sings. I grew up. We just that's what we do when we get together. I don't really play an instrument. I played the trumpet back in high school some, but my dad plays the guitar. When we get together, we sit around and sing. We just had a family reunion, and that's.
Is it all religious?
Usually, yeah, we'll get together and sing old choruses or stuff. Yeah.
Like what's some old songs?
Oh, I'll Fly Away. You ever hear that one? We sing some of these from just from the old hymnal, the red back hymnal. That
What's the first verse to I'll Fly Away?
The first verse. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away. Yeah.
Well, you are a singer, aren't you?
Yeah. So that's.
How do you make your voice wiggle like that?
Man, I don't know. Can you not do it?
No, I
You don't
couldn't. I
sing?
can't sing nothing. I can't
I don't
sing
believe.
nothing.
I think anybody can sing.
I have too many barriers up to allow people to see me sing. I see it as being vulnerable somehow.
What is this that you're doing?
Good question. I'm not singing.
Yeah.
I don't know what the difference is. I've not thought of that.
I don't know you.
If
I
I
don't
could
know
talk,
you,
I couldn't sing.
I don't know you well, Dee, but you don't seem to be someone who's completely barriered off.
I would not be singing. I wouldn't sing for
No.
nothing. For $1 million. If
Well,
you gave me $1 million, I wouldn't sing.
I am convinced that most, maybe there are some people who are truly tone deaf, but there are very few. I think most people can sing.
Is it a learned thing?
I think you definitely can learn and get better. Practice. That's
I'd like to
anything.
go to somebody that would say, hey, teach me to sing and tell me if I've got a good voice and be honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't know who would, but then that would be an opinion, right?
Yes.
Because you take Hank Williams Sr., they said he couldn't carry a tune.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear any of his music?
Sure.
Was he a sing? Could he carry a tune?
I think so. Yeah, that's people have different styles. I like to listen to old Johnny Cash songs and so the same thing. I think for some people that's not.
He was more of a ballad singer, right?
Yeah. But it's not their style so much. But
He was like a troubadour, right?
like a troubadour. I don't know the.
A troubadour was a small group that went from town to town, and they would sing for room and board.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that's what he was.
Well,
He was
starting out?
and they would sing ballads, like sing
Yeah.
a story.
Yeah.
So that was what more like Johnny Cash was.
Troubadour. Okay.
Yeah.
Taught me a new word.
Yeah, Van Morrison mentions troubadours, and Johnny Cash mentions troubadour.
Huh. That's interesting.
So do y'all sing before church?
Like
in
just
the
getting
choir?
ready?
In the choir?
Oh, yeah. We just this morning, we usually get there. I get there. My wife doesn't sing in the choir, but we get there early and kind of warm up.
Like what time?
We were there this morning at 8:30. Get there and kind
For
of
Sunday school?
There's like at our church at 9:30 there's a service. So
Sunday school
or
yeah.
meet before that. There's like a prayer. It's a prayer service. We do like a Sunday school in the evening time. We do groups. So we get there and kind of warm up and sing a little bit, and then the service there starts.
Do you wear? I know this sounds crazy, but do you wear a gown?
We don't.
Because
I think
if you
they
did,
used
that
to.
would be funny, wouldn't it? A gown at the lab and a gown at the choir.
Yeah.
You
Now,
get
if
them
I
mixed
wore-
up.
If I wore a choir gown to the lab, though,
They wouldn't.
yeah.
But if you wore the lab coat to the choir, that would be a problem.
Yeah, that would just be gross. You
when I get out-
know what's on that lab coat.
When I get out of church, I go to Central Church of Christ. I'll get out and I'll drive. Sometimes I go to the car wash afterwards, and I'll see Stephen leaving the church and crossing 25th Street. He must park over there.
Yeah, that was before. Again, we've moved locations now, but before we did that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So who's there now?
What's it? Life Church, I think.
So do you sell the church?
Yeah, the building there. You should go by if you're ever. So where there was a golf course there on Candy's Lane.
Oh yeah,
extra
I
from
know.
That property
Yeah.
is where the new church is. So it's brand new. I mean, it's been right at 1 year.
Jim Sharp went there for a while.
When we were moving in, it's funny. We sold the other property and had to move out, but then COVID happened, and so we couldn't move in to the new church. We met for almost 2 months in the parking lot. They were doing services because we were out of the old building. But,
like a drive-in theater.
But then, like, everything shut down. Yeah, kind of. You know, they had everything set up, but you just stayed in your car. So it's crazy times.
I couldn't get used to that. Could you?
No, or you know, watching things online. I'm looking forward to fewer just online meetings and just things. I enjoy seeing people face to face, and so there's just something about that you can't capture in a Zoom meeting. Or
it's the lab coat. It's similar to the lab coat. It's showing something, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. Just there are cues that you get.
Cues, that's the word. Yeah.
Being in a room with
you can
someone.
cue, and there's cue. You can cue your mind up
Yeah.
to thinking.
Well, that's been something that's really been missing in a lot of ways, though, this past year, hasn't it?
Cues
Yeah.
in everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you can. You know, in the mornings when I finish my coffee, that cues my mind to think, where am I going to eat lunch?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not thinking about that till I finish the coffee.
Yeah.
But we have cues all the time, and that we don't even know, right?
Yeah. No, I think so. So that's something. Man, I'm looking forward to. We're going to have classes all in person, and people be able to work in groups together.
Now you're back at Lee now, right?
Yeah.
You know, I was at the Burger Chef Friday, and I was or it might have been Friday, or it might have been Saturday morning. But anyway, and they had a table in front of the cash register, and I couldn't reach her, and she couldn't reach me. They had plexiglass. I've already been vaccinated, so what's the point?
Yeah.
And she can't reach the dollar. But it was still $1. I had my hand on it.
Yeah.
I mean, she's going to take the dollar.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Oh man, the plexiglass, I can't hear.
I can't either.
And I find myself, I know it's there as a
Yeah.
shield, but then I find myself sort of leaning around and talking.
You ever tried to look under and talk to him?
I'm sorry, but I'm gonna lean over here.
See, that's a cue. That
Yeah.
plexiglass is a cue that we can't hear.
Right. Oh, but
If you had your choice, would you have a lab in your basement where you could do these experiments, and research, and
maybe not in my basement.
would you have a piece of paper where you logged in? Don't you have to log in? You're doing what you do on the experiment, like
A notebook, kind of. Yeah.
what do they call that?
Yeah, lab notebook. That's actually, if you're working, doing research, and you discover something, it's important to have those notes if somebody needs to come back. So if you came up with a discovery and patented it, for example, you need to have those original notes proving that this was your discovery. So generally, that needs to be dated and have the notes of what you did. So say you came up with some great technology advance or invention, and maybe somebody else tries to steal it from you, right? So you need to have your documents showing that when it happened, and then also sometimes people may come back and ask for details about an experiment. Maybe they want to try something or repeat it. So those notes are helpful. If you don't have them, you know how things are. You go on and do other things and you forget details. So.
Or it might have just worked because you were doing that experiment at 2:00 in the day, and you noticed that it only works if you do it. Something might be in there.
Right. Yeah.
If you're going to repeat it.
Right. So that's little details like that. As much as you can, it's good to record, because
I noticed
big part of doing research is things not working, right? Or
Yeah.
you're trying something and it
Yeah.
turns out different than you expected, and then trying to understand that. And so keeping detailed notes is important. You know. When I started graduate school, I remember, when we were first joining a lab, they described it to us. It says, research is kind of like baseball. If you can get, if you can bat 300, right? If you can get like 30% of what you do to work, you're going to be an all-star. So just be prepared. 70% of the time, you're going to try something, and it just, for various reasons, it's not going to work. So you'll spend the majority of your time sort of troubleshooting that. I did this, and didn't work. So what do I need to do to get it to run the way I want it to?
What's the old saying? Thomas Edison knew 1,000 things that didn't work.
Yeah, he said.
Was that Thomas Edison?
Something. I haven't failed 1,000 times. I've found 1,000 ways that didn't work. Something like that.
Right. Yeah.
When he's inventing the light bulb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And come to find out, he didn't even invent it, right?
Is that right?
I think there was a question as to whether he invented it.
I don't know.
That's where they get the idea of the light bulb going off in your head.
Should have had a notebook.
He should have had a notebook.
I don't know, but yes, that's an Edison quote.
Do you like living in Cleveland?
I do.
How long have you been here?
We moved here in 2012, so 9 years we've been here. Cleveland is, for me, it's a real nice size. My wife is from Atlanta, so I think Cleveland's a little smaller, a lot smaller than Atlanta. But I grew up in a really small town, and so Cleveland's kind of like an in between size. It's a good size for me. The people here are good. Our boys are in high school now, but they've gone to the elementary. And
where did they go to high school?
They go to Cleveland, and they're twins. They'll be in the 10th grade this year. So.
How close do they look alike?
Not at all.
Were they born the same hour?
They're 1 minute apart. So I mean they're twins, but they're not identical. They don't look alike.
They act alike.
They're completely different. They get along really well, but they just have different personalities. Completely. So
if somebody said, if you said they're twins, somebody'd say, no, they're not twins. What do they call it? So they don't. They're
fraternal. So they're not identical. But yeah, I mean, you might look at them, and most people, if you just saw them, you wouldn't pick them out even as brothers necessarily, because they look so different. Our son Eli looks like my wife and her family, and Caleb looks a lot like me when I was a kid. So
what about their personalities? Is his personality
opposite? Caleb, the one that looks like me, his personality is, I think, more like his mom, and vice versa.
Now that may all change, right? I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
What grade are they in?
They're going into the 10th this fall, so they're 15. We got learners permits now.
Boy,
so that's kind of one of our boys is in band camp right now, and then the other one, we've had a little bit of time these last couple of days. We've been driving around town a little bit, so that's an adventure.
Wait till they don't come home till 1:30 at night, and scare you to death.
We haven't gotten there yet, but
you will.
Yeah, it's right around the corner.
Yeah, and it's always my battery went dead. That's why they didn't call. Oh boy.
The phone battery.
The phone battery, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say that you're lucky to be raising them in Cleveland, Tennessee.
I think so. This has been a great place to raise kids, and when we first moved here, the boys went to Arnold Elementary right downtown, and we bought a little house on Oak Street, and we were able to walk. We walked to school, and
you're right there, aren't you?
My wife and I walked to work, and we moved about 2 years ago. Actually, not far from here. We live over off of Bow Street, off of Blythe Ferry Road now. But yeah, those first several years, the whole time they were in elementary school, it was just so nice, so idyllic. We could walk everywhere.
Do you like it better living up here, or would you prefer downtown?
Well, they're different. I like where we're at now. It's got a little more space, and that's been nice. Especially the boys a little older, but I miss being able to walk to work. That's
you would walk right by Jerome Hammond's house, right?
Yeah.
That'd be the only downside,
right?
It
was a 5-minute walk to and from. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I rarely saw Jerome, so it was.
You're lucky on that
end,
right?
Those days, started off a little rocky, but.
Do you eat lunch there at the school? They have a cafeteria.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we didn't this past year.
COVID, I guess.
And the cafeteria was still open, but it was different. It was you couldn't serve your own. Everything was packaged and stuff. So we really didn't go over there at all this past year. But we normally I don't every day, but I'll go over there maybe a couple days a week and grab lunch. It's a nice way too to see students sort of outside the classroom and just let them know that I eat.
You're a real person.
I'm a human person, and you can talk to me.
My son had you in class. He said you were extreme. He really liked the class.
Yeah. He's a good guy.
He's smart.
He's a good guy. Yeah. I enjoyed having him. That was my genetics class.
That was probably Zoom, right?
It was a mix. So we met in person, but there were always people on Zoom too.
He's very mannerly. I'm not sure how he got that, but he has always been very mannerly for some reason.
He didn't get that from his dad?
Nope.
Yeah, no, he's a good guy.
I don't know why, not manners like that.
You must have...
maybe his mother.
You must have picked a wife who had good manners.
Must have. Genetics.
Yeah. No, he's a good guy, and you guys should be proud. But.
Well, Jonathan, I tell you what, I've enjoyed you being here.
Absolutely.
And you've really enlightened me. Thanks for coming.
Yeah,
I'm glad people like you are out there.